When the Raven arrived in River Run, soaked in rain and carrying the Lannister seal, no one expected what was inside. Robb Stark had just returned from battle, fresh with the sting of victory and the weight of loss. His bannermen gathered around the fire, celebrating small gains and mourning greater ones. The war had taken much already, his father, his sisters, the sense of childhood that once warmed Winterfell. But this raven carried a different kind of weapon, a proposal. Cersei Lannister, the Queen Regent, widow of Robert Baratheon, mother to the boy King Joffrey, and most hated woman in the north, offered herself to Robb Stark in marriage. At first, Robb thought it was a jest, a cruel joke meant to mock him after the slaughter in the Riverlands. But the more he read, the more it made sense. Tywin Lannister was dead, killed in a sudden ambush near Harrenhal. Joffrey was flailing on the throne. Cersei had seized control. In the chaos and now cornered by politics, she was making a move no one saw coming. She offered peace, not a truce, but a union. Her hand in marriage in exchange for legitimizing Robb as king in the north, swearing off claims to the south, and helping her keep her grip on King's Landing. His council raged. Great Janumba spat on the floor and shouted, "You'd rather bed a lion than avenge your father?" Others argued this was a trick. A Lannister never gave without poisoning the gift. But Robb's eyes didn't burn with anger like the rest. They burned with calculation. "If I refuse, the war goes on," he said, voice low. "Thousands more will die, and if I agree, perhaps we end this on our terms." They told him she couldn't be trusted, that she was a viper wrapped in gold, that she would slit his throat in his sleep and feed his dire wolf to her son. But something in Robb had changed. Love was gone. Duty weighed more, and so he agreed. The wedding was cold and quiet, held in the sept of Baelor. There were no songs, no joy, only wary glances and whispered prayers. Robb arrived dressed in stark black and grey, his direwolf ghost pacing like a shadow. Cersei stood in red and gold, veiled, her face unreadable as ever. She didn't smile during the vows. Not yet. But later that night, when the doors closed and the feast died down, she looked at Robb, her new husband, her northern conqueror, and smiled for the first time. It wasn't a smile of love. It wasn't even a smile of peace. It was victory. She was older, sharper, and twice as dangerous as any he'd faced in battle. In public, she played the loyal queen. She stood beside him, shared the table, gave speeches to calm the kingdoms. The small folk were shocked. The North watched in silence. Even Sansa, still trapped in the Red Keep, struggled to believe what she saw unfold. Robb, for all his pride, played along. He was colder now, less trusting. He shared a bed with her, but not a soul. He spoke to her only when needed. He ruled with steel and silence. But she made moves. Littlefinger returned to court. Varys disappeared. The Tyrells whispered of betrayal. And somewhere in the midst of it all, Robb began to feel the walls closing in, not from outside, but from within. She had her claws in every room. She never raised her voice, never showed her anger. But sometimes, late at night, he'd find her sitting in the darkness, a goblet of wine in her hand, whispering to herself about lions and wolves and the weakness of men. And still, she smiled. Every time a bannerman of the North questioned her, "Loyalty," she smiled. When Robb brought up Arya or Bran or even Jon Snow, she smiled. When he asked about Joffrey's madness or the fate of Ned Stark's bones, her lips curled and silence fell between them. He had married his enemy, and she never stopped smiling. Winterfell was no longer just a fortress, it was a throne. And in that throne room stood a queen who did not belong, and yet no one could remove her. When Robb brought Cersei to the north, the silence was heavier than the snow that fell endlessly. The people didn't speak her name. The servants avoided her eyes. Maester Lewin's old chambers, once filled with knowledge and peace, now reeked of southern perfume and the faint scent of poisoned wine. Lady Stark, Catelyn, had refused to return to Winterfell. She had left to live in the Tully lands, unable to stomach the sight of her son with the woman responsible for Ned's death. She sent no letters, no ravens, only silence. And still, Cersei smiled. The Northerners treated her with cold respect. The Karstarks, the Mormonts, the Glovers, all stared at her like she was a ghost wrapped in silk. She didn't flinch, she simply walked the halls like she owned them. She never asked about the Godswood, never stepped foot in the crypts. She lit her own fire in her chambers and sat by it for hours, drinking and whispering names into the flames, names that meant something. Only to her and Robb he changed. The Boltons were preparing for something. Supplies were being gathered, armies quietly mustered. And worse, it spoke of a child, Cersei's child, his child. She hadn't told him. He burst into her chambers without warning. She was by the hearth, brushing her hair, gold glinting in the firelight. She didn't look surprised. "Is it true?" he asked. She met his eyes in the mirror. "Which part?" "You carry my child." She turned, the brush slipping from her hand to the rug. "Yes." He stepped forward, hands shaking, not with joy, not with fear, but with something colder. "And you sent word to Rose Bolton before you told me?" "I told the one who matters," she replied. He stared at her like she was something unholy. She rose to her feet, moving closer, voice soft. "A Stark heir with Lannister blood. Imagine the strength. Imagine what we could rule." "I didn't marry you to build an empire," Robb growled. She laughed then, soft and bitter. "No, you married me because you were tired of losing." Wanted to scream, wanted to break something, but instead he turned and left the room in silence. The next morning he summoned his bannermen. The hall was tense, thick with uncertainty. Robb stood before them not as a king, but as a man betrayed by the peace he had made. His voice was steady, but there was a fire behind it. "The Queen is with child," he announced. "My child. And yet she plots behind our backs, aligning with lords who once slaughtered our kin." There were murmurs. Fists clenched. But no one dared speak against him. He paused, eyes scanning the faces. This marriage was meant to end a war. Instead, it started another, one within these walls. The lords nodded slowly, unsure of what would come next. And in her chamber above, watching through the frost-covered glass, Cersei smiled. Because she wanted him angry, she wanted the north divided, and now she had both. The snow came heavier that week. The skies wept white for days, covering the castle in a silence even Ghost refused to disturb. The north had always felt cold, but now it felt haunted. Not by ghosts, but by a future nobody trusted anymore. Robb hadn't spoken to Cersei since the gathering of the bannermen. She kept to her tower, and he kept to war councils. But both of them knew they were circling something too big to ignore. The child. Their child. It wasn't just a matter of blood. It was about the line, the legacy. A Stark born of Lannister womb. Some called it an abomination behind closed doors. Others called it the beginning of a cursed dynasty. The kind of story mothers told to scare children in the dark. But Cersei, she relished it. She began walking the halls more, not in hiding now, but in full view. Her belly still showed no sign, but her hand rested on it when she passed nobles and maesters, as if daring them to question her. She wore lion's red every day, not wolf grey, and that did not go unnoticed. Lord Karstark was the first to break. He rode out from Winterfell without permission, claiming illness in his house. But everyone knew what it meant. He would not fight for a king who bedded a lioness and called it peace. Robb tried to stay focused. He spent his days with maps and his nights walking the ramparts. Ghost followed silently, the only soul who hadn't changed around him. But even Ghost growled when passing Cersei's door. Then came the raven from the twins. It was short. No more than 5 lines, but the name signed at the bottom turned Robb's blood to ice. Walder Frey. The same man he had once promised to wed a daughter. The same man whose insult had cost the Freys their alliance. Now Walder offered a gift, his banners, his army. But there was a price, legitimacy for the Lannister child, a future lordship in the Riverlands, and Cersei had already written back. She denied it, of course, played dumb. "I write many letters," she said when Robb confronted her. "But nothing you wouldn't approve of." He stared at her for a long time. "You never asked for approval." Her eyes glittered. "Neither did you when you made war, when you buried your father, when you married me." That night, something shifted. Robb ordered the guards at her door doubled. He began eating in private again. He sent a raven, not to his bannermen, but to Jon Snow, wherever the bastard might be on the wall. "If things turn," the letter read, "you are my last breath." He knew what was coming. She was moving the pieces now, not him. But Cersei. She wasn't done. A week later, she summoned the Maester. Quietly, secretly, she told him she'd been bleeding, that the child was gone. The news reached Robb like a punch to the chest. He didn't cry, he didn't speak, just stood in the godswood alone for hours, the snow melting on his shoulders, fists clenched so hard his knuckles bled. When he finally saw her again, she was dressed in black. Not mourning, but mocking. No one else wore black in the castle, not even in winter. But she did. As if to say, "I carry death now." She placed a hand on her stomach. It wasn't meant to be. Robb looked at her, but he didn't see a grieving mother. He saw a queen who had removed a threat before it could grow strong enough to matter. "You killed it," he said, voice hollow. She raised an eyebrow, but didn't deny it. "Perhaps, but really? Does it matter?" He turned away from her, and she whispered to his back, You thought you could tame the lion, Robb, but lions don't kneel. We rule. That night, the direwolf ghost stood in the snow outside her door, unmoving, watching. A warning, a shadow of something primal that couldn't be spoken in words. And Cersei. She sat inside, sipping wine, still smiling. The next morning, there was blood in the snow. Not much, just a smear. But enough for the guards to find. A raven lay dead by the rookery door, its wings torn, its throat cut. It hadn't frozen. It hadn't fallen. It had been murdered, deliberately. The message it carried was gone. Robb stood over the carcass, jaw clenched so tightly it ached. "No raven leaves this castle," he ordered. "Not without my seal, not one." But he already knew. The damage had been done. More and more, strange things began happening within Winterfell. The guards rotated strangely, some disappearing for hours at a time. The kitchens stopped preparing traditional northern dishes and instead served Lannister-style feasts. Robb's closest allies were being drawn away, called on urgent missions that pulled them far from the seat of power. One night, Lord Mormont came to him. "She's bribing them," he said. "Gold, promises. She's speaking to the lords behind your back. If she isn't planning to turn the North against you, then she's already done it." Robb didn't sleep that night. He sat by the hearth, Ghost at his side, running his fingers through the wolf's thick fur like it was the only warmth left in the world. He remembered a time not long ago when everything had been simpler, when the North stood behind him, when he rode into battle with fire in his veins and hope in his heart. Now all he felt was weight. That same night he caught her. Cersei, robed in red, in the East Tower, whispering through a steel grate to a raven handler with no name and no house. She turned slowly when Robb entered, not surprised to see him. "You. Forget?" she said softly. "I lived among spies longer than you've lived at all." "What did you send?" he demanded. She stared at him for a long time, then said simply, "The truth." "You lie. I don't need to lie," she said. "I just need to speak. The North will believe what it fears." Robb stepped closer, eyes blazing. "This marriage was meant to end a war, not start a rebellion." Cersei smiled. "Robb, every marriage is a war." For the first time, he saw it clearly. This wasn't politics. This wasn't vengeance for Ned. This wasn't about peace. This was about domination, and she was winning. He grabbed her arm, not gently. "End this. Whatever you're planning, stop it." She leaned in, her breath warm against his cheek, and whispered, "I already did." That night, Lord Umber was found dead in his chambers. No wounds, no struggle, just dead. A smile frozen on his face and a cup of wine spilled across the floor. Robb knew he didn't need proof, didn't need a Meister's report. He had seen that same smile too many times. He knew it, like he knew the bite of steel. Poison. Cersei walked through the hall the next morning like a grieving widow, even though she never once spoke to Umber directly. She wore a shawl of fur, stark fur, and let it trail behind her on the cold stone. That day the North changed. Lords stopped calling Robb Your Grace. They started calling him Lord Stark again. Small folk stopped bowing. Even the ravens flew differently. Robb sat alone in the war room, staring at the map of Westeros. His hand hovered over Winterfell, the one place he thought he'd be safe. the home he had bled to protect, and now it belonged to her. Ghost growled at the door. There was movement, a figure in the dark. It was Arya. She stepped forward, her face thin, her clothes soaked from travel. No fanfare, no trumpet, just a girl with eyes that had seen too much. "You're late," Robb whispered, eyes wide. "I came as fast as I could," she said, and then she looked around. "This place doesn't feel like home anymore." "No," he said quietly. "It doesn't." "Is it true?" she asked. "Did you marry her?" He didn't answer. She clenched her jaw. "Then we have to kill her." He looked at her, this shadow of his sister, this girl who had turned into a blade, and for the first time in weeks Robb didn't feel alone. But when he glanced up at the tower, where Cersei's window glowed with candlelight, he felt it again. Fear. Because even with Arya back, she was still smiling. Arya moved through Winterfell like a shadow. To most, she was still a ghost, assumed dead, forgotten, or merely a whisper in a long list of stark tragedies. But she moved with purpose. She didn't ask permission, didn't wait for orders. She just observed, listened, watched. And what she saw chilled her. The guards didn't answer to Robb. Not all of them, anyway. Some bore the wolf sigil, but they stood straighter when Cersei passed. The halls whispered in tones that spoke of gold, not loyalty. Robb's name was spoken less and less. He was a king in name only now. Arya found Robb one evening in the Godswood, sitting beneath the heart tree with his sword, ice laid across his knees. He looked like a statue, still, cold, exhausted in the kind of way that sleep could never fix. She sat beside him without a word. For a while, neither spoke. Then finally, Robb said, "She's poisoning everything. Not just the wine, the people, the land. Even the silence feels hers now." Arya glanced at his sword. "So why haven't you killed her?" He didn't look up. "Because I made a choice. I thought I could trade blood for peace." Arya's voice was sharp. "And how many died for that mistake?" Robb's silence was the answer. That night, Arya crept into the tower. She wanted to see for herself. Cersei's chambers were guarded by two silent men in black cloaks. Not Northern, not even Westerosi by the looks of them. She watched them from a shadowed alcove, noting their movements, the way they didn't flinch. At the cold or speak to each other? Foreign sellswords, likely. Brought from the south under false names. Inside the room, Cersei was writing. Again? Always writing. Arya's eyes narrowed. Ravens had been flying again. Despite Robb's orders, someone was smuggling them out. She followed the trail the next morning, watching the rookery. The Maester, Torrin, was too frightened to defy Robb openly, but the boy who cleaned the cages wasn't. Gold had bought him. Southern gold. Arya reported everything to Robb. He slammed his fist into the war table, hard enough to crack it. "Enough," he said. "It ends tonight." He called a gathering of his remaining loyal bannermen. The Mormonts, a few Glovers, a small number of sworn men from the western hills. No Boltons, no Karstarks, no Freys. Just what was left. They made a plan. The attack would be swift, quiet, surgical. Cersei's foreign guards would be taken down first. Then the chamber breached. She would be given a chance to surrender, and if she refused, The North would reclaim its honor in blood. But nothing went as planned. When the soldiers burst into the tower at midnight, they found the guards already dead, throats slit, armor removed. The room was empty, gone. Only a goblet of wine still sat on the table, half drunk. A single note rested beside it. Arya picked it up. Her hands shook. It read, "You were always too late, little wolf. By the time you strike, I've already smiled." Robb was already running. Down the stairs, into the lower halls, toward the dungeons. They found the jailer's body first, his eyes wide open in shock, a dagger in his side. One of the cells had been opened. Inside, chained and broken, was Lord Roose Bolton. Robb stared in disbelief. "You," he muttered. Roose chuckled bitterly. "She didn't trust me after all. Thought I'd get too ambitious." "She turned on you?" Arya asked. "Of course she did. It's what she does." Robb looked around. "Where is she?" Roose's grin was filled with blood. "Gone. Took your guards, took your secrets, took everything." And then he laughed, mad, bitter, empty. That night, Winterfell burned in 3 places, quiet fires in the stables, the Ravenry, and the Eastern Gate. Not enough to destroy the castle, just enough to send a message. She was gone, with no army, no child, no husband, just power. And still, somewhere out there in the snow-covered south, she was smiling. It took 3 days before the snow stopped, falling hard enough for riders to track anything, but by then the trail was already half cold. Robb sent out 6 scouts, only 2 returned. They found pieces of the others, burned bones, scraps of fur, and a single golden brooch shaped like a lion's, head buried in the ash. It was a message, and everyone in the North knew it wasn't meant for them. It was meant for him. He stood in the war room, the same one where they had planned his wedding, his battles, and his eventual surrender to diplomacy. The cracked table looked smaller now, broken and forgotten. Arya leaned against the stone wall, watching him. "She's going south," she said. "Back to King's Landing." "No," Robb replied, his voice low and sure. "Cersei Lannister never goes backward. She's going east. Essos." Arya raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "She's done here. The North, the throne, the child. It was all a game to her. She got what she wanted. Chaos, weakness, bloodlines shattered. Now she'll find new pieces, new kingdoms to poison." Arya's jaw tightened. "Then let's follow her." But Robb didn't move. For the first time, his hesitation felt like something else, not fear, not confusion, guilt. "I let her in," he said. "I thought I could use her, that I could be better than my father, smarter, kinder, but all I did was trade one war for a slower death." Arya stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Then don't stand here and mourn it. Fix it." So they rode, just the 2 of them, Robb and Arya, brother and sister, wolf and shadow. Ghost followed silently. South, through the neck, through the burned-out villages that still whispered the names of the dead, past the twins, where the Freys dared not face them, past the blackened ruins near Harrenhal, where the trees never grew right again. All the while, they followed signs, dead men, empty camps, blood in the dirt, but never a body. Cersei didn't travel with an army. She didn't need one. Her name still opened doors, still bent knees. In every village they passed, someone had seen her. A woman in red. A queen without a crown. A lioness with gold in her bag and steel in her tongue. "She's moving fast," Arya said one night by the fire. "Too fast for someone alone." "She's not alone," Robb murmured. "She never is." By the time they reached the port town of Maidenpool, they were too late again. The docks were empty. A ship had left that morning, headed east. To Pentos, they said, or perhaps Lis, or maybe even Bravos. No one knew for certain. But they all remembered her. "She smiled," said one of the dockhands, trembling. "Paid us double, then told the captain he wouldn't regret it. Said the world had grown too small for little men, that it was time for something bigger." Arya spat on the ground. "She's planning something." "She always is," Robb said quietly. They stood on the cliffs above the sea that night, the wind tearing through their cloaks, waves crashing against jagged rocks. "You can't chase her forever," Arya said. "I won't have to," Robb replied. "She'll return." Arya turned toward him. "How can you be sure?" "Because she hasn't finished destroying me yet." They were silent for a long time. Then Arya said something he wasn't expecting. "You still love her, don't you?" Robb's throat tightened. "No," but he hesitated too long. Arya looked away, disgusted. "She killed our brother, burned your allies, poisoned your child, and you still carry her like a wound." "She was never mine to carry," he said. And still, as they rowed away from the sea toward a world that might never be the same again, he found himself thinking of her, of the cold way she laughed, of how she whispered names into the fire, of how she had looked at him on their wedding night, and still, God's help him, of how she smiled. 2 years passed. The war ended, but the North never healed. The kingdoms never truly unified again. The Iron Throne stood empty longer than it ever had before. Rumors whispered through every tavern, every alley, every castle, from dawn to the wall. The lioness lives. No one knew where. Some said she ruled a freehold in Essos, wealthy beyond imagining. Others said she had joined the Faceless Men and wore new faces each day. A few claimed she had died at sea, swallowed by the gods for her sins. But Robb Stark knew better. He felt her. He carried her like a burn that never faded. It festered beneath. The skin, rage, guilt, memory, longing. She had taken everything from him. His peace, his family, his name. And worse still, she had made him understand her. And that was the most unbearable part. He no longer ruled. He had given up his crown, passed his title to the North's new council. Arya had vanished again, back to her own war. The lords no longer trusted him. He didn't ask them to. He just left. He wandered, quiet, alone. South, always south, until one evening in old Volantis, in a brothel built of black marble and red silk, he heard it. A voice, low, commanding, unmistakable. He didn't turn, not at first. He just stood there, cloak still dripping with sea mist, hand resting quietly on the hilt of his blade. He waited until the room cleared, until the candles flickered low. Then he walked up the spiral stairs and entered the chamber at the top. And there she was, Cersei Lannister, alive, unbroken, more dangerous than ever. She was dressed in silk, barefoot, lounging beside an open window where the moonlight traced her golden hair. She didn't rise, she didn't flinch. She just looked at him and smiled. "Robb," she said, as if she'd just seen him yesterday. I was wondering how long it would take. He said nothing. She poured wine. 2 cups. You're thinner, she said, but still handsome. Brooding. Looks good on you. Still he didn't speak. Nothing to say? She asked, tilting her head. His voice was hollow when it finally came. I buried them all because of you, she sipped. I didn't make you weak. I just showed you what was already broken. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate. You poisoned the North, and you let me, she said calmly, because you were desperate to believe peace could be bought with love, or power, or me. There was silence. Then Robb asked a question he never thought he'd speak aloud. Did you ever feel anything for me? Cersei's expression didn't change. She looked him in the eye and said, yes. It broke something in him. He reached for his sword, but her voice stopped him. Quiet, honest. You think killing me will fix you? She asked. No, he said. But it might stop you from doing this to someone else. She stood then, slowly, walked toward him. No guards, no blades, no magic. Just her. I did love you, Robb, she said. But I love myself more, and then... She kissed him. It wasn't soft, it wasn't gentle. It was a wound reopened, a fire relit. And then she whispered, do it. He stared at her and drove the blade through her stomach. No scream, no gasp, just breath. She slumped against him. Her eyes locked on his. Her fingers clutched his cloak, and even as the light faded from her eyes, even as her blood soaked through his hands, even as she fell to the floor, lifeless and finally still, she smiled. He left her body in the chamber. He didn't speak of her again. He didn't return north. He wandered, nameless, forgotten. A king with no crown, a husband with no wife, a wolf that chased a lion too far from home. But some say, in the silence of southern nights when the wind passes through red, silk and black stone, you can still hear her laughter, and always her smile.